Welcome, everyone. Before we get started, we have a little poll for you tonight. We're curious about how many years approximately have you been canning and preserving foods at home? Is this your first time just getting started? It's been 5 years or less, between 5 and 10 years, 10 to 20 years, 20 to 30 years, or it's been so long that you've lost count. We'll wait another minute or so. If you haven't already filled out the poll, we've got a poll about how long you've been canning and preserving at home. You should see that on your screen. I also want to make you aware that live captioning is available to you. What you need to do is click live. Let's see. No, that's for me. Closed captions or captions on the bottom of your screen. If you need assistance with that, let me know. Welcome to those of you who have just joined. We have a poll on the screen for you to answer, and live captioning is available. Just need to activate that setting. All right, well, welcome and thank you for joining us for part 4 of the Everyone Can Garden series, vegetable gardening for people with physical and other limitations. Tonight, we're going to be discussing in detail how to preserve your harvest. So if you planted a garden this year, you might be up to your knees in cucumbers and cherry tomatoes at this point, maybe some kale. That's what's going on in my garden. And so we're going to start talking about what to do, with all of those goodies that you can't consume right away. Laura, I wanted to answer this question. You are all muted right now. So there's a Q&A. Thank you, Laura. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with an overview of tonight's session. And by the way, the video recordings of parts 1 and 2 are already available on YouTube. Make sure that you have access to that link. You should have received it in several emails by now. And then eventually the other parts will be available online as well. So let's go to the next slide.
Do you want me to end the polling? you want to share any of that?
Sure, we can. I was waiting for some other folks to come on, but we can end the poll. Thanks, Kathy. No,
Sure.
So we have a wide variety of people present. The majority, well, actually not the majority, but the largest group of folks are just getting started, but we have experts in the room as well. And what I want to do is encourage you, if you are one of those people who have been canning and preserving for so long that you've lost count, or 20 to 30 years, and you have ideas or suggestions, please, please, please contribute those in the chat box during our session tonight. We love to hear from participants, and you have something that you can teach all of us. Oh, sorry, there were the results. So 48% of us just getting started. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned, the series is recorded. Tonight's being recorded as well. And eventually you'll be able to find the whole thing online in multiple places. Chat is available for you to use. And you're able to communicate with just the panelists, which would be myself, my colleagues, Kathy and Laura, or all panelists and attendees if you want everyone to see. So if you have a nugget of information to share, please make sure you select all panelists and attendees when you submit that chat message. If you have a question, and somebody already did this, if you have a specific question that you would like to have addressed, please submit that through the Q&A feature so that it does not get lost in the chat. I'm going to send to you a survey link in chat at some point during the session, and there's also going to be a QR code that you can use your phone to take a photo of. Please complete that survey for us after tonight's session. We really want to know what you thought of it. And then I'll be sending you a follow-up email with actually probably a link to the recordings for all of the other sessions. So you'll get another communication. And if you signed up for part 5, you'll get another email from me closer to that date. Next slide. So I'm Leo Taylor. I'm the program manager for faculty and staff affairs in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. And our office strives to create and maintain an accessible, inclusive, and supportive community for everyone who learns, works, and teaches in CFAES, as well as OSU Extension, which is a part of CFAES. And I am pleased to be facilitating this program with my colleagues in Extension, and they include Laura and Kathy, and I'm going to turn it over to them.
Thanks, Leo. I'm Laura Ackerman. I am the Disability Services Coordinator for Ohio AgAbility and OSU Extension and the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. And I am Leo and Kathy's colleague, and I'm very lucky to be that. So thanks, Kathy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kathy Tutt, and I am the Family Consumer Sciences Educator for Ohio State University Extension in Clark County. So I am located in Springfield, Ohio.
This is Laura again, and I never, ever, ever pass up an opportunity to talk to you about Ohio AgAbility. Our mission is to promote success in agriculture for Ohio's farmers and farm families who are coping with disability or a long-term health condition. Ohio AgAbility provides education and resources to farmers, agricultural businesses and groups, healthcare, education, and disability professionals, and anyone interested in making farming, gardening, canning, or preserving safe and accessible. Our website is AgAbility, AgRability.osu.edu.
So it's back to me again. As I mentioned, I'm the Family Consumer Sciences Educator for Ohio State University Extension in Clark County. And when I tell people that, they kind of go, huh? What do you do? And so I try to kind of capture it all into a really short little blurb for people, is that in Family Consumer Sciences, we take the most recent research-based information, and we deliver that out into our communities. So I said I am in Clark County, but we do have extension educators all throughout the state of Ohio. For me, family consumer science is all about making people healthy, wealthy, and relationship wise. So you'll see we work through nutrition programs and food safety, food preservation. We do a lot of stuff with budgeting, with healthy finances. And then we also have our healthy relationships group, which does a lot of work with parenting and co-parenting and even some older adult programs as well. So I am going to be doing a lot of talking today, so I hope you guys will bear with me as we go through this. We're going to be talking about preserving your food at home and how that can be pretty rewarding for folks. So we're going to go over a little bit today. We're going to, I've kind of condensed a couple different lessons when we do it hands-on and in person. These are usually an hour to a 2-hour program individually. But today I condensed a few of those, combined them down. So we're going to be talking about reasons that people preserve food at home, when to harvest your produce, cost of preserving and storing your food. We're going to go through some steps on water bath canning and then also on pressure canning as well. So before you ever start preserving food at home, you have to be aware that it does require a significant amount of time, energy, and money. So before you start your preservation, it's really important to consider the types of food that you plan to preserve and how it's going to fit into your family's lifestyle. When I teach in the community gardens, I tell them all the time, don't plant things that you're not going to use or that you're not going to preserve, because then it's just going to go to waste. And we really only want you to preserve the amount of food that your family is going to consume within 1 year. That 1 year time frame is when we're going to get the best quality from our preserved foods. So why do we preserve food? There are so many different reasons that people choose to do their own home food preservation. You know, I just told you about the cost associated with it. So you have to get the right equipment. You know, if you're growing your own produce, that's great. And so when I ask people, why do you want to do this? Some of them are very insistent that they want to know what is in their garden. They want to know what they're consuming. So there's no question as to where their food came from, and the way that it's grown and their ingredients. Other people, though, get a really great sense of personal satisfaction from doing their food preservation as an activity. Another reason that people have said is because it's very convenient. You have it on hand and it's there when you need it. And another thing that really, we hear a lot of times, and I've heard this more and more, is this: it's become more of a generational thing, right? Or they do it with their family, their friends. It's a time for people of coming together and just enjoying and building those traditions and those family relations as well. So when we look at different types, different methods of food preservation, there's several different ways that you can preserve your food at home. They include canning, so using a boiling water canner or a steam pressure canner. You can also freeze your food, you can dry, and you can use fermenting as another one. So you want to choose the method that is right for you. And the decision really is based on the type of food that you choose to preserve. Today, we're going to focus on two of those that I just mentioned, and those are methods of canning. So we have two different types of canning. As I mentioned, you have boiling water canning, and then you have pressure canning. So the boiling water canning is used for canning acid foods. So at sea level, the water boils to about 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And as altitude increases, your water boils at a lower temperature. And since lower temperatures will be less effective in killing bacteria, if you are at a higher altitude, your processing time would have to be increased as your altitude increases. The other one is your pressure canning. And so pressure canning is the only safe method for canning low acid canned foods. So when canned under pressure, temperatures higher than boiling point of water can be reached. The higher temperatures, like 240 degrees, are necessary to destroy spores of bacteria that cause botulism. Botulism is a very deadly type of food poisoning. And then there's also spores that will kill, that are killed through this, that cause spoilage in your food. So when do we decide? Again, as I said before, the canning method that you use that's approved through research and through our food scientists depends on the characteristics of your food. So for the purpose of canning, and I want to make sure that I'm going to mention this a couple times because it's really important. Foods are really divided into two main categories. There's going to be high acid foods and then low acid foods. So your low acid foods are foods that contain enough acid to prevent the growth of bacteria that causes botulism poisoning. So bacteria if a food is high in acid, it has a natural ability to fight some of that bacterial growth. And for that reason, we can use a water bath canner for these. So the types of foods that we include in this are your fruits, tomatoes, if you add acid to them, and then pickled and fermented foods. It's really important to follow approved recipes for canning and not adjust any amount of ingredients in any recipe, because any change in the recipe could change the pH level or the acid level in that food. The low acid foods contain very little or no acid. And these include things like vegetables and meats, seafood, and any mixed products. So like your soups or your stews. And again, with this, it's very, very important to follow approved recipes for canning and not adjust the amount of ingredients in the recipes, as it can alter the pH. The reason that I say this is because we use research-based, science-based recipes in the recommendations that we use. There are food scientists who that's all they do is they're watching food all the time. The reason I said that tomatoes, we have to add acid to them now when we can them in a water bath is because for so long, people have complained about how acid tomatoes are, that our growers have started to do hybrids. So we get hybrid seeds, and it's actually lowered the level of acid in tomatoes to the point where they're right on the margin of needing to be pressure canned. And so we get around that just by adding some acid to that. I told you about botulism. So the reason that low acid foods have to be pressure canned is because of the risks of Clostridium botulinum poisoning. The bacteria that causes botulism is a spore former. So the way that it works is when conditions are not favorable for an organism to grow, so like high heat or dryness, drought, any of those things, these bacterial cells form a protective structure, and they're called spores. And so to destroy the spore, it takes a higher temperature than boiling. So water boils at 212 degrees. And we know from food scientists and from the research is that we have to reach temperatures between 240 and 250 degrees to ensure the safety of the product. If the spores are not destroyed, they can germinate and produce a toxin in the food when it's stored on the shelf. And then the food that contains this toxin, really, there's no visible signs of spoilage for this. It can cause very deadly type of food poisoning that usually begins within about 72 hours after you've consumed it. And the symptoms can include digestive upset to blurred or double vision, difficulty swallowing, breathing, paralysis, and even death. So that's why we're so careful to follow the pressure canning directions when we are canning low acid foods. Do I need to take a second and answer questions, Laura, or are we going to hold them till the end?
That is totally up to you. However your flow works. I know I get distracted, but.
All right, I will try not to look at the chat box and I'll just.
Okay. Good call. That's why I can't do it.
So basics of canning. So food is placed in jars and they're heated to temperatures that destroy microorganisms. The heat also, it inactivates enzymes that can lead to food spoilage. And then after the air is driven from the jar during the heating, it will vacuum seal and it seals upon cooling, and that will keep any air from being inside of the jar, which will also cause bacterial growth. So I mentioned before how important it is to follow the most recent and updated guidelines when it comes to doing your own home food preservation. So if you have any old books that have been passed down through generations and generations, you need to get rid of those unless you just want to frame them on the wall or do something like that. You need to be using the most recent and up-to-date guides for this. So here are a couple of guides that we recommend. First one is the United States Department of Agriculture. It's the complete guide to home canning, and you want to use the 2015 edition. There's also a book from the University of Georgia called So Easy to Preserve. It is a fantastic book, and you want to be looking for the 6th edition for that, and you can order that online. Your Ball Blue Book, you need to be looking for the 37th edition. So anything newer than that or older than that needs to be discarded. So now that we've talked about the most up-to-date methods and the information, we're going to start looking a little bit now about the equipment that we need. What do we need to do to start the process? So we are looking for jars and lids. So to prepare your jars for canning, you want to, first thing is wash the canning jars. You're going to check them for chips, nicks, any scratches, because jars with these little imperfections may not seal or they could break during processing. Jars can be washed in hot soapy water for processing times that are more than 10 minutes. But if you're going to be doing jars to do like jams and jellies or pickled products that are processed less than 10 minutes, then we have to actually sterilize those jars. We are also looking for the 2-piece canning lids. So we have a lid and a ring. And you want to prepare those according to the package in the instructions for the brand that you're using. A lot of times with our lids, we do simmer them in water so that the seal will soften up during the use. You want to have some type of plastic knife or an air bubble remover, and I will show you one of those a little bit later in the presentation. And this is simply just to remove air from the inside of the jar. You don't want to use a metal knife or any type of metal object because we could actually score the inside of that jar. And then once we put it into the canner, it could cause a weakness and cause it to break. We are going to make sure that we're wiping jars clean when we're after we filled them. And then we're going to adjust the 2-piece lids. So we put the lid on and we adjust the ring only to finger tight. That's all the further that we're going to pull that in. Over tightening the jars can cause them not to seal and not allow the air to escape out as necessary. So acceptable jars, you want to be looking for jars that are mason type jars that are intended for canning. So we can't use the single use or one-trip jars like mayonnaise jar or something like that because they can break during the canning process. So even if you have an old jelly jar, a Smucker's jar, and you have a canning lid that fits on there, that is not an acceptable jar for us to use because it's not meant for canning. Canning jars do come in sizes from a pint, half a pint to a half a gallon. Now the half-gallon jars are not for pressure canning. They're only recommended if you're processing apple and grape juice. We also don't want you to use metric measuring jars or the old, they used to have, I have some, they're the antique jars that have like a wire bail that they used to cinch down. Those are not acceptable. And also jars with zinc lids are not acceptable either. So I went over this a little bit before, but before we start to do anything, we want to make sure that we prepare these jars. So when you're sterilizing the jars, again, it's only required if you're going to be processing something for less than 10 minutes. Sterilizing is not required when you're pressure canning or processing in the water bath for more than 10 minutes. So we sterilize the jars by boiling them for 10 minutes. If you are at an altitude of 1,000 feet or more, you need to add 1 minute to that sterilizing time. You're going to keep the jars in hot water until they're used to prevent the jars from breaking when the filled product is hot. Also, you want to wash and rinse your canning lids and your bands and prepare them according to the directions on the box. So when we talk about filling our jars, we have two different types of packing. So packing is filling the jar. So the first type of packing is a raw pack. And this method is used for foods that might lose shape when they're cooked. So you place the raw food directly into the jars and pour boiling hot liquid over the food. Pack them firmly, but don't crush them, and put lids on, and they're ready for processing. The second method is a hot pack. So this method is preferred method for most of our foods. The food is cooked in liquid before packing, and then the cooking liquid is actually poured over the food in the jar. The jar actually is fuller and you have less floating that occurs. So when we do a hot pack, it's a little bit more mushy, a little bit more malleable. We can fit more into that jar. But the really important thing is that you use the liquid that you're cooking it in so that you're catching some of those nutrients. If you've ever done green beans, cooked green beans or cooked carrots, how some of those, the color will leach out into the water. And those are some of those key nutrients that we want to capture when we're canning our food. So when you do a hot pack, you're going to cook the food down, but whatever liquid you use, you want to use that to fill your jars. You also want to make sure that in some instances, there's not an option to do a raw pack. So you're going to read your instructions and make sure that you understand if it needs to be a hot pack item, if it says that in the directions, then you have to hot pack it. So after we've packed them and before we put on lids, we have to check the headspace or the space that's left up at the top of the jar. And your instructions are going to tell you how much headspace you need. If there's too little headspace, so this is an air gap at the top, food could bubble out during processing and deposit on the rim. And if it bubbles over and deposits on the rim, it could prevent it from sealing properly. If you have too much headspace, then food at the top is likely to discolor, and the jar may not seal properly because the processing time was not long enough to drive all of the air out of that jar. And so the very last thing that we do, not really last thing, but we do have to make sure that we remove air bubbles. I told you I was going to show you a picture of an air bubble remover. So this is the air bubble remover. The top of this picture also has little notches that you can see that looks like stair steps. Those are actually headspace measurers. So if you flip this tool over and put it inside of the jar, the first notch is like a 1/4 inch headspace. The second one is a 1/2. The third one is a 3/4. And then that last notch is a 1 inch headspace. So you can just flip it over and wherever you need to be, you kind of run it around the rim and make sure that your food isn't above that food or liquid. So when we do the bubble remover, what we do is, again, a plastic knife or a bubble freer so we don't scratch the jar. So we have the water poured over it, and we're just going to go around the edge of that jar, all the way around the edge, and you're going to start seeing little tiny bubbles that will come to the surface. Now, sometimes that means that your food is going to settle a little bit, and now you need to add more because you have too much headspace in there. So you want to always double check your headspace after you remove bubbles. And the next thing that we're going to do then is we're going to wipe the jars clean with a clean cloth. So we're going to wipe around the edge and definitely over the top to make sure that we don't have anything that's spilled in there. And then we're going to adjust the 2-piece lid. So we put the lid on and we adjust the rim. And remember, the ring is only fingertip tight. We don't want to wrench it on there and push as hard as we can. That's not what we're supposed to do. We want to make sure that we do fingertip tight so that that air that needs to escape has the opportunity to escape out of there before it actually seals. So your processing time is always going to depend on the food. Each food has its own processing time. Follow your directions carefully. Time is going to differ depending on the thickness of the food, the type of food, and the size of the jar. So remember that too little processing time or an inaccurate pressure can cause food spoilage. You also want to, look at the prepared style of your food. So the size, the shape. Do we have meat in strips? Do we have cubes of meat? Do we have chunks of meat? Do we have ground meat? That's all going to affect the processing time. We also look at the composition of the food. So the viscosity and the tightness. The heat transfer, is it one of those things that will transfer heat through it? You also have to consider the temperature of the food when it's jarred. So if you raw pack it, your processing time is going to be a little bit longer than if you hot pack it. And then also, again, the size and the shape of the jar will also affect the amount of processing time. Now, whenever I teach this in person, I have to go over this slide. And I'm kind of not sure why we have to do it, but we do. So there are some unsafe ways to can food. So the newer research has provided information on food safety, and you always want to follow up-to-date information. If you have questions, you can always check with your extension's office, your local extension office. We also have on our FCF's webpage, we have food preservation office hours, which is they have wranglers out there that are answering questions whenever they come across. So each of these methods here have been used in the past and can create a sealed jar in quotation marks, but the current science has shown that these are not safe methods for canning food. In these, your food may not reach a high enough temperature to destroy the microorganisms. Air may not be fully driven from the jar, and seals just may not be strong enough and can weaken over time. So we want to make sure that we are not canning in an open kettle. You cannot can in your oven. You can't can in the microwave. You can't can in a dishwasher. You can't steam can. You should not use canning powders. The old zinc lids are no longer acceptable for you to be using for canning. And those old jars with wire bales and glass lids are not acceptable either. All right, so I'm going to go into this water bath canning. The very first thing that you always want to do before we start working with any type of food is that we're going to wash our hands and we're going to sterilize and sanitize our kitchen. You can use a solution with 1 tablespoon of bleach and a gallon of water, and that will sanitize your kitchen, your cutting boards, your countertops, anything that food might come in contact with. So the next thing that we need is our canning jars and our lids, a water bath canner or a pot that's large enough to have water go over top of the jars. And then you need to have a rack as well. We also need to have a jar lifter. And if you aren't familiar with those, they are almost like a claw that you hold, and you're going to be using those to take jars in and out of the canner. And then you also always want to start out with your safe canning information. One thing that I do want to touch on here is that the smooth pap ranges. So those ceramic ranges that are all smooth, you need to make sure you read your manual for that equipment. A lot of manufacturers warn against canning on those smooth pap ranges, simply because if you've ever noticed, they do cycle, right? If you have one at home, that ceramic gets hot and it turns red and then it cycles down, it cools itself off and hot. And so we're not comfortable yet with knowing that it's actually holding the right pressure or the right temperature. We also are concerned about the flat bottom of the pot coming in contact with it, as well as the burner size, matching that burner size to the size of your pan as well. So just about any large pot can be used for boiling for a water bath canner. The pot should have removable perforated rack to lift the jars off the bottom of the canner. And the rack here is inside of the canner. And what it does is it allows water and air or water to circulate around the jars and also helps prevent them from breaking. So they're not sitting directly on the burner and they don't get so hot that they will break. You can use any type of rack that's going to fit in the canner, but do not put towels in the bottom of the canner. Your pot should be deep enough though, if you're using any type of canner, to allow for at least 1 inch of briskly boiling water to cover your jars during the processing. So I mentioned a few minutes ago about water bath canning and tomatoes, and I want to make sure that I mention this again. But the only way to safely can tomatoes in a boiling water canner is by increasing the acidity slightly. So the natural pH of most tomatoes are very near the 4.6 pH cutoff for boiling water canning. So it is recommended that we add citric acid or lemon juice to lower the pH or to raise the acidic in there. So I want to make sure that you do have that information. That is very important as well. So some steps for boiling using a water bath canner. So here we are to can your foods in a boiling water. You're going to need about 6 inches of water in the canner. It's really a good idea to have an extra pot of boiling water in a separate pan, setting off to the side in case you need to add more water later. If you have to add cold water to it, it's going to take quite a bit of time to get that back up to that boiling temperature. So I always like to have some simmering water sitting on the side so that if I do need to cover the jars, if I need more water, then I have that. The temperature of the water in your canner that you add the jars really depends on the type of packing that you're using. So if you're using hot pack jars, the water can be simmering when the jars are placed in the canner. If you're using those raw pack jars, the water should be hot but not simmering so that we don't shock the glass when we put it in there and then in turn break it. So we're going to place the jars on the rack in the canner so they don't come in contact with the bottom of the canner. And then once you have the jars in the canner, the water must be 1 to 2 inches above the top of the jars. And I didn't mention to you, but when we do place the jars in the canner, we want to make sure that we never tip them. So we're going to lift them up straight and we're going to put them back down in the canner straight so that we don't tip them from side to side. When you tip them from side to side, you could have some food product that goes over into that lid and then it won't allow it to seal. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wait for that canner to come to a full boil. So we have our jars in the canner. We've added water 1 to 2 inches above the top, and now we need to wait for it to come to a full boil. Once it comes to a full boil, then we can start that processing. Remember, if your altitude is over 1,000 feet, you're going to need to make adjustments to that. So we're going to let that boil for whatever time is recommended in our recipe or in our instructions. And then after it's completed, we're going to turn off the canner and we remove the lid carefully away from our face, right? So that the steam can escape from your face. You know, you're going to hold it up and then you leave it sit there for just 5 minutes before you remove the jars from the canner. So while you're waiting that 5 minutes, you can prepare the area where you will put the jars to cool. And then you're going to need, just as you place them in the canner straight up and down, you're going to need to lift those jars straight up out of the canner and place them on a towel or a padded surface in an area away from drafts. You want to let those jars rest for 12 to 24 hours. Do not retighten the rings, right? They will loosen up. You're not going to retighten those. You're going to check then to see if all the jars have sealed, and you're going to listen for a little tiny pop that goes in there. And then the lid will also curve inward. It'll have a concave in the center of it, and it won't move if you press it. Once they're cooled, then you can remove the outside ring of the band, and you want to do that. You want to take the ring off once they're cooled, and then wipe your jar off to make sure there's no residue or no water in there, no moisture. So that you can store it that way. We do take the ring off because we have had some instances where there's some residual moisture up in there and it causes some rusting of our ring, and then that rust can bleed over and actually break the seal on our lid. So you want to make sure that you do remove that ring. And then you want to you're going to also store your items by labeling them as well. So I'm going to move now. I know I went pretty quickly, but I want to make sure we have time for questions and answers at the end. So we're going to talk about the pressure canner. So with a pressure canner, again, we have canning jars, just the same ones that I mentioned before, and our 2-piece lids. You're going to have a pressure canner with either a dial gauge or a weighted gauge. They also need a rack. You need a jar lifter so you don't burn yourself. And again, those safe, current and reputable sources for our instructions on how to can. So we're going to get to know the canner just a little bit, and I apologize for some of you guys who are at that bottom who've been doing this for many, many years, but I want to make sure that I touch on here for everyone. So whether you're purchasing your pressure canner new, or you have a hand-me-down, you find it at an auction, your pressure canner should have the following. So there needs to be a rack and also a locking mechanism for them. Mechanisms are a little bit different for each person. Each canner brand looks a little bit differently, but you want to make sure that it does firmly lock in place. And then again, a rack on the bottom so that we can have that water circulating through there. The other parts of your canner are a flexible rubber gasket or a tight metal seal. Gaskets do need to be fitted correctly, and they also should be checked for dryness or any signs of cracking. Now, the extension office there are some counties that do inspect your canner for you. We recommend that you get those inspected once a year. And then we can also, if you have a dial gauge canner, we can check your gauge to make sure that it's still accurate. But this is one of the things that we do is we'll check that gasket, we'll bend it around and make sure it's not showing any sign of like dry rotting or any cracking on that gasket. You also have a pressure regulator. So you either have a dial gauge or a weighted gauge. This picture is a dial gauge where you'll see that the pressure will increase as the pressure, or the gauge will move up as the pressure increases. And then over on the side, there is also a vent pipe for pressurizing. I'm going to go over that in just a few minutes here. We also have a counterweight. So once our pressure canner has pressurized itself, we put the counterweight over to close that vent. And you can, like I say, you can have your extension educator look at your canner and just double check to make sure that everything is in place. The other part are the safety valves. So the safety valves are a little black, usually a little black rubbery valve on the top. And that little valve, that little rubber piece should be really rubbery and malleable. You should be able to squeeze it. It should go up and down. It shouldn't be hard. It should not be dry rotted. The pressure plug is our safety device. So if the pressure gets too high in this pressure canner, if we have a plug that's nice and soft and rubbery, it's going to pop that out and start spewing steam out of there before anything else. So you hear these horror stories about people's canners exploding, and it's probably because they either didn't have the right size gasket on there or their safety plug was not in good shape. So you want to always double check that. So I showed you the dial gauge. This is a weighted gauge. So there are two different types of weighted gauges for your pressure canner. The first one is one that you see, it's a cylinder one, and it's got markings for 5, 10, and 15. So depending on what your instructions tell you, you would simply put that spot down on the canner on the valve. The other one is just rings. So the ring by itself is 5 pounds. If you add one more ring to it, it's 10. And if you have all 3 rings on the top of the canner, then you are canning at 15 pounds of pressure. So we do want to make sure that you know that there is a difference between a pressure canner and a pressure cooker. The USDA does not recommend processing for canning in a small pressure cooker. The recommendations for using the USDA pressure processes for low acid food is that your canner should hold at least 4 quart-sized jars for this. The research right now with the USDA for the pressure processes for vegetables and meats that were conducted in the pressure canners, and they're most similar to today's 16-quart larger pressure canners. So you want to try to stay away from the pressure cookers when it comes to canning. There's just not enough research out there yet for us to say, yeah, it's fine, go ahead and use that. So I mentioned a little while ago that we do need to vent. The venting pipe that's there. So venting or exhausting your canner is a process in which the empty space becomes a mixture of steam and air. The temperature of the mixture is lower than that of pure steam. And so venting is a crucial step in the process of pressure canning. Processing times are based on a pure steam environment. So without proper venting, up to 30% of the sterilization value of a 20-minute process can be lost. So in order to vent our canner, let me see if I can, your steam, I thought that was a video. Nope. Okay. Steam has to flow freely from your port. And we want to see a good steady stream of steam. And we're going to let that, once we have a good steady stream, we're going to let that process and that vent for 10 minutes. before we close off the port on that. So after you put your filled jars in the pressure canner, fasten the lid, place it, and leave your vent port open. Turn your heat on high. When the water boils, steam will start to come out of the open vent. And again, once there's a strong, constant funnel of steam, then you're going to start timing for 10 minutes. At the end of those 10 minutes, then we're going to place our weight, and we're going to start pressurizing the canner. And remember, again, as your altitude, we have to take into altitude into effect too when we're pressure canning. If your altitude is over 1,000 feet, you're going to have to add time to your pressure canning. So the next few slides here are going to walk us through this pressure canning process. You may want to do this without jars once, just to see, kind of get a feel of it, right? And see how it starts, so that you don't actually waste any food. So we're going to start with about, we're going to put the rack in the bottom of the canner. We're going to have 2 or 3 inches of water, and we're going to place the jars on the rack. You want to make sure in this instance that your canner is full. And if you don't have enough food jars, then to fill the canner, just add extra empty jars with water to take up that empty space in there. So then we're going to place the lid on the canner. Sorry, my mouse doesn't want to work. There we go. We're going to put the lid on the canner with the weight off of the vent port open, heat on high until you see the steam flow. And again, we're going to go for 10 minutes. I think this is our video that I did. Let's see if we can get it, if you guys can catch this. So that is our background. That's the steam that we want to see coming out. And again, we want that to come out for 10 minutes. Okay. So after 10 minutes of venting, you're going to close the vent port for your canner, and your canner is going to start gaining pressure. Once the proper pressure has been obtained, you begin the processing time. And so for your gauge canner, your dial gauge, you're going to watch the pressure gauge increase up to where we need to, and then we're going to start regulating our temperature to make sure that we stay within that. If you have a weighted gauge, then we put the weighted device on top of that vent port, and we're going to wait for that to start rattling. It's going to start jiggling back and forth at a steady pace. And once it does that, or once it gets to the proper temperature, then we're going to start our processing time. So you're going to get it up to the processing, and you're going to process it for the amount of time that your recipe calls. Then when we finish at the very end, we're going to, after our processing time is up, we turn off heat to stop the processing. And we are going to leave the canner sit there. All right. We have to let the pressure drop on its own. Don't try to cool the canner quickly. Don't go over and lift up the weighted gauge with a spoon to let the pressure sink out, because part of this time that it's dropping back down is also considered in the processing time. Your heavy walled or even older canners can take about 30 minutes full of pint jars, or about 45 minutes with quart jars to get down to a 0 pressure. Your thinner wall canners can go down a little bit quicker than that. So after it's completely dropped to pressure, then we're going to take the weight off, and we're going to open the vent port and wait about 10 minutes to make sure that these jars have sealed really good. And then we're going to open the canner very carefully. So when you take the lid off, you want to make sure that you tilt it away from your face, because this is still going to be really, really hot. And the water and liquid in the jars could still be even boiling. And we're going to carefully remove the jars with a jar lifter. Again, lifting them straight up and setting them off to the side on a nice padded place, letting them cool for about 12 to 24 hours again. The last step for this is to check and make sure that all of your items have sealed. And so I got this little video, and you're going to have to watch it a couple times because it goes really, really quick. But I actually captured one sealing, one where the vacuum seal actually happened. So you listen for a pop and the lid curves inward, and it won't move if you press down on it. So let me show you this little video. So I'm going to play it again because it's right at the very end. You can hear that pop, and then you can see the lid go concave. I was just excited that I actually captured that, sorry. And then after we take them out and we've let them cool, this is where we're going to take those rings off. We're going to clean all around the jar to make sure that it is clean and dry. And then you store it in a cool, dark place. Avoid any temperature extremes that happen. And you want to use them within 1 year. And then our very last thing that we really make sure that we do is that we thoroughly clean and dry your canner lids and your gaskets. A lot of times I will just take my gasket out so that there's no moisture buildup between the gasket and the lid itself. You're going to clean your vent and your openings with like a pipe cleaner, just running it up and down there. You're going to put crumpled paper or paper towels inside of there to absorb any type of moisture that might occur. And then you're going to turn your lid upside down and store it that way. We don't want you to seal it back up. We want you to be able to let that canner breathe when you're not using it. And again, I'm just going to tell you to make sure that we are following instructions exactly as they're written. If you add extra sugar or fat, or if you don't prepare the food according to the directions, or if you add thickeners, so starch or rice or noodles, the processing time that's tested by our food scientists as being accurate to heat and cold spores in the jar may not be safe. You want to make sure that when you're canning that you really can't rush that process, right? We have to make sure that we take the time to do it the right way. A lot of people will say, well, I love my salsa the way that I love it. And this salsa that's in the recipe book is not spicy enough for me. And I tell them you have to follow the directions in the book. And then when you take it out of canning, if you chop up some jalapenos or whatever you want to mix in there, stir it up inside of there, and then store that in the refrigerator overnight, you're going to get that same sense, but you followed a safe recipe for you. Really quickly, there is a new canning app for your phone from Oregon State Universities. And we feel at Ohio State that this is just such a good opportunity for you that we're not going to try to replicate it. We're not going to try to make one ourselves. It's a free app. It's called Canning Timer and Checklist that you can download on your phone. And what it does is it actually walks you through step by step. So you get to choose what you're going to do. If you're going to do vegetables or fruit. And then I chose fruit on this one. So it asked me, what are you doing? And when I clicked on it, I said tomatoes. Then it asks you for your elevation and it walks you through every single step of the process. It asks you what size jar you're using. And it automatically knows because I'm using tomatoes that I'm going to use a water bath canner. And it asks you the type of packing that you're doing. And then it gives you the things that you need to gather before you even start. Now there's more slides to this, but I don't want to take up any more time. But when you go through, it actually tells you like the time that you need to can it, when to turn it off, every single step in there. And you go through check boxes as you go through it. So it guides you. And these are our references for my part of it. And so what do we want to do now, Laura? Do we want to?
Kathy, you have a question in the Q&A. It's about recommendations on how to handle foods for the new freeze drying home units. Are there any available yet?
Leslie, I have not heard anything about that yet, but I will ask someone and see if I can get an answer for you. Freeze drying.
That's all the questions we have right now.
Okay.
I would say since this webinar is partially from the DEI office, I wanted to say if someone's working, if they have a disability, if you have limited strength or mobility, Leo mentioned that he's got a lot of back pain. Normally, I will always say, we will find a way for you to do this. I'm not going to say that this time quite in the same way. I'm going to say, please, as important as it is to can correctly so you don't get botulism or anything else, it's also incredibly important to be aware of your physical limitations, whether that's your energy, your strength, your dexterity. your ability to lift these heavy and extremely hot things straight up, safely, do it well. This is a great activity to have other people come and help you with. The prep work, those carrots don't just peel and cut themselves. So I would say between Leo and Kathy and I had talked earlier, and Leo said doing that, we talked about doing the prep work beforehand because it takes a lot of time. Pace yourself to do this, make a list of the things you need to do. If you can invite some people in to do some canning with you, if someone else has the upper body strength and the dexterity and the eyesight, really, because there's a lot of looking that you have to do this, let them do that. You can prep, you can cut, you can clean, you can wash bottles, you can do a lot of other things. But I think that the biggest thing besides all that wonderful food is please be safe, not just with your temperatures and handling the hot items, but thinking about what you can lift, what you can carry, what you can set down. It really catches up, and it's really hard work. It's been years, but when I was a kid, I would help my grandmother and mom can, and boy, it was really hard work. So I just want to reiterate that be very aware of the movement and activity involved. And if that is not something you can safely do, find someone else. I think it would be a lot more fun to can with other people than by yourself anyhow. So that's what I've got.
Thanks, Laura. Kathy, will you, for a sec, okay, we can see your screen. Your Google search. There you go. All right, we have 3 questions. Can jars which have stood full of produce for a number of years be cleaned, sterilized, and reused?
Yes, as long as there's no residue, if there's no chipping or cracking or anything like that, then those jars can be sterilized and used.
Can you use the old canning jars, blue-green in color?
Yes. Those are all like the old mason jars or the ball canning jars. Those are fine. You just can't use the zinc lids. Let me, hold on just a second. Let me see if I have one here.
And we have a slide for the feedback survey. So we're going to stick around. The evening goes until 7:30 if people have questions.
I don't know if you can see, this is the old jar.
Yes, we can see it. Nice.
So this jar itself is good. It hasn't been nicked or anything, but this is a zinc lid and these are not, you cannot use these anymore. All right. When I talked about the wire bales and the glass lid, this is an example of that one. So these are not, I don't know why I keep losing my picture. Let me,
Because put it in front of you, right in front of your face. There, right. Nope. Yes, there we go. Because otherwise it becomes part of the background. Your virtual background.
there.
There we go.
So this is the jar with the bale and the glass lid. So these are not a safe canning method as either.
Great.
I did put in there in chat some information from another extension service. So the Utah State University, they have something on home freeze dryers and what to know before you go. So I put that in chat, a nice link for that page.
Thanks, Kathy. Somebody's wondering, I noticed this myself, but this was last year, and I think it was because a lot of people were canning and they hadn't canned before. Is there a canning lid shortage? I'm having trouble finding them.
So I originally this summer, I couldn't find any. The last couple of weeks when I've gone, I've been able to find them. You can also order them straight from Ball, and they will get them to you, or even check on Amazon to see. But I did find some just at our local grocery store the past couple of weeks.
Tatler lids? Is that a brand?
Yeah, and those are fine. Those are okay. Those are acceptable. Just follow the instructions on the packaging.
What's the best way to preserve onions? I will have an overabundance of onions. Freezing, drying, question mark?
So the onions don't usually freeze that great from what I'm used to. I usually would dry them if I'm going to use them in any way. They just don't, they usually get crystallized and you have to blanch them before you freeze them. Let me find my book. Give me just 1 second because I do
Sure.
have.
I'll answer Margot. Margot, yes, you should always use new lids because you may not get a proper seal if you reuse one that's been used before.
Right. So once you use that lid, that rubber, and it seals to that jar, that little rubber part that's inside of that lid is no longer strong enough to hold that lid.
Very
I
awesome.
told you that the bulbs are the University of Georgia. This is my Bible. It has everything in it that you need to know about food preservation. So they do say you could pickle your onions, make onion relish, dry them, and can them. Let's see about canning of onions. Let me look. Yeah, you can. You are going to pressure can them, and you're going to hot pack them. So they must be hot packed, and they have to be done under the pressure canner.
Thanks. Diane, yes, you can use a dehydrator to preserve herbs. That is what I'm doing this year, actually. And
Yes, and in the past, I have also, if I don't have a dehydrator, you can put it in the oven under really low heat. Also, we've done them where you get just a brown paper bag, like a lunch bag, punch holes in it with a hole puncher, and then you tie the sprig of whatever your herb is into that. And then as it dries, it will flake off of there and fall into that bag. So you just put it in a place that's open air. And you will know that when it's completely dry is when it actually falls off of the sprig, off of the stem for it.
so there are a couple people asking questions about the jar brands. So Kerr better than Ball, and then someone else said, how about Weck jars, Kilner? I don't know those two.
So the Weck jars are not recommended. That was one of the ones that come up as we're not 100% sure. It's a European brand jar, I believe. And the measurements are not like pints and quarts, but Ball and Kerr, those are all fine.
What is Kilner also a brand?
Kilner. I'll have to look that one up. I haven't heard of that one. How's it spelled, Leo?
Kilner.
Kilner jars.
I think Ball are the best jars on the planet, and I am totally not biased because I went to Ball State University. Kathy, you have a question. I just made it possible for you to unmute if you'd like.
So it does look like Kilner might be using a metric system as well. So I think I would stay away from those.
All right. Anne must have been a follow-up question. Let me see if I can find the original one. Tatler lids was her original. And then how do they differ from gasket ones?
Let me look here really quickly because I don't use those too often. I usually just do my. So the Tatler lids look like they come with a ring and then an actual top that goes to it. And then the ring that goes over top. And so you're going to have to get new the rubber things each time you use it. So the lid can be reusable, but the new rubber ring comes separate. So you have to get a new one each time.
Nice. All right, any other questions? Kathy, if you want to ask a question, I see your hand is up. Just let me know and we can try to give you access to your mic. In the meantime, I'm going to do a quick share screen so that you can all right, this is the one I want. You see the feedback survey? Okay, great. So I put this link in the chat box about 6 minutes ago. I'll go ahead and put it in again. We would really appreciate your feedback. You're welcome to stick around for a while longer, or you can use your phone and point your camera at, you have to have the phone on the camera app, and point it at this QR code, and it'll take you right to the survey. It'll take you no more than 5 minutes to complete the questions, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks, Laura. Good catch. No problem, Jane. I'll be sending that link in the follow-up email tomorrow as well. So someone had requested in chat that all of the links that have been posted in chat be shared via email. I'll be sure to include anything that hasn't been shared already via email in that follow-up email. And just to remind you, we have part 5, the last installation of this excellent series on about everybody can garden, gardening with physical and other limitations. On Tuesday, August 31st, same time, same place. This time we'll be addressing garden cleanup in preparation for next year. I can't believe we're already there. I mean, we're not quite there yet. It's still over a month, but we're already talking about canning and preserving.
Kathy, I think it's a good time for you to give a short commercial on the Universal Design House and all the fabulous kitchen accessibility and age in place.
I'm going to share my pictures. Let's see. So at the Farm Science Review location, so the Molly Caron Agricultural Center, which is in London, Ohio, we actually have a display there called the Universal Design Display. And the idea behind the Universal Design Display is that you're making your home accessible and usable for everyone of all abilities, while also capturing the beauty and not taking away any home value or even making it look undesirable. And so the pictures aren't there. Just a minute here.
In the meantime, while Kathy's looking, we're here to answer any more questions you have. It could be about canning and preservation. It can be about any other parts of the series with respect to vegetable gardening. Someone says, many years ago, I met Ron Mace in Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, that's cool. So
He was the founder of the concept of universal design. They said,
oh, really?
Yeah, I also want to, speaking of accessibility, I want to thank our live captioner for tonight. Thank you so much for providing that service.
So this is my universal design kitchen out the Molly Caron farm. You can see there are several different features that you can just see right off the bat. So many people, when they build their kitchen island, they build it high enough for bar stools to sit there. It immediately eliminates anybody who may need to be seated, who can't sit on a high stool, or who is in a wheelchair from being able to be at that kitchen island, that gathering place, that social place. I also think it's really important too that even if you don't need to be seated right now, there may be someday in the future where in order to prep food, you need to sit down and prep that food. So this is a great spot for that. We recommend varied counter heights so that you can get access to everything. You can also see over to the left, you can see the cooktop there with space for knee space. And all around the whole perimeter of the cabinetry is a kick plate area for like a wheelchair if it needed to be. Let me go out of this one.
Oh,
Oh, my doggies, they're my babies. So we also have a kitchen, a dishwasher. So our dishwasher is lifted up off the ground for anyone so that you don't have to bend over so far to get things out of the dishwasher and put them away. It's just a lifted dishwasher that makes it easier for you to access that. We have pull out spice racks right there near that cooktop so that you don't have to move around the kitchen. You have everything in one spot. We do also recommend that the flat cooktop have your controls at the front. So if you do need to be seated, you're not reaching over across boiling hot temperatures to try to turn your oven off and on.
I noticed, Kathy, to interrupt here, I noticed if you go back to that previous slide or picture, there's a recess underneath the stove so that if you're in a wheelchair or seated, that you're not
Yes.
bending over a lot to reach the stove. That's nice.
Yeah. So this is place for your knees. So even if you're not in a wheelchair, if you, as my mom got a little bit older, she wasn't as steady on her feet, but she still wanted to be independent. So she could just have a little chair that she'd pull over there and sit while she was cooking. Let's see. This is what we call a Rev-A-Shelf. So this is in a high cabinet up above, and it's simply a shelf that you can pull down to the level of where you are. We have been able to control it with 2 fingertips. You bring it that stuff in that cabinet all the way down to you at your level. So even if you're a shorter person like me, it's really, really something that's beneficial to have.
And I need that I have cabinets that are touching the ceiling. I
Yes.
have a little step stool that I have to keep in my kitchen, foldable step stool. I need that, but I need it to come from the ceiling all the way.
You can put it anywhere you want. You could, there's all different sizes and different shapes. So it just mounted into any existing cabinet. Pull out shelves throughout so that you don't have to try to crawl into your cabinets to see what is in there. Let's see.
Someone wants to know if it's possible to tour that house. They are an interior designer who has always included a universal design in their teaching of interior design students.
Absolutely. So I do a couple different things. We can, you could come out during Farm Science Review. It's very busy that time. We could go, I could meet you there at some point in time. I also have had design students from Ohio State come out with it's part of their class curriculum that they do. I've had occupational therapy students that come out and tour as part of their class. And so it's just a matter of setting up a time and a place with me, or not a place, but a time that we can meet out there. We do have to keep in mind that this building is not heated. So it's very, very cold in the winter and it gets pretty hot in the summer, but it'd be better for us to be in the summer than in the winter. This is another look at the kitchen as well. There's your oven is built up and built higher, so you don't have to bend over and get hot items out. It's also really nice and convenient because you can literally transfer something from inside of the oven onto your countertop without having to do a whole lot of lifting. I could stay on this all night. That's my, let's see that one. I also have this done as a virtual tour on our FCS website. So it's fcs.osu.edu. Under programs, we're going to healthy relationships. Down here is universal design. And if you click on that, over here on the side, it says virtual tour. And so this is that same design, that same place as a virtual tour. So what it is there's hot buttons everywhere. So you can press on the button and then it gives you a video about it.
Universal design begins at the front door. At least one entrance of your home should have a zero-step entry. However, this does not mean that you have to install an external wheelchair ramp. Looking at this picture, can you see the ramp? This universal design feature shows a slow-grade slope up to the front door with landscaping built around it. This design feature provides a smooth and rampless transition into your home.
So, and then you can go inside by clicking the arrows, and you just maneuver around the whole display. There's 360 views. There's Laura's garage with some of our information in there. Let's see. I'm trying to find you get you to a better spot. We do have our washer and dryer that's on a pedestal. We talk about this is a bad universal design door, opens into the room. And especially in bathrooms, we've had our fire marshal say that a lot of people will go into the bathroom and they fall, and it's such a small room and they try to open that door inward, they can't get to them. And so the option are, we take the threshold out, we make the doors wider. And this is actually a pocket door, so you don't have to worry about that turn radius. Or you take a door and you mount it, you reverse the mount, and you have it as an opening outward instead of into the room. I did want to show you some of our kitchen gadgets. And here we go.
Many bathroom sinks are already within the height range for accessibility, which are 32 to 34 inches from the floor to the top of the sink. This universal design bathroom features a teardrop sink with a bowl that extends beyond the edge of the vanity, making it easier to use without having to bend over or lean over the sink. Most bathrooms do not have a 27-inch of clearance from the floor to the bottom of the sink needed for easy access. Because of this, it is smart to redo the entire sink area. To make the space under the sink suitable for wheelchair access, an angled panel should be installed to protect legs from hitting pipes or being burned on the hot water pipe. An alternative is a wall-mounted sink that has no plumbing other than a short drain pipe going into the wall.
So, and I could have you go all day through it, but you can go all the way, you can go through the whole display yourself through it virtually.
And I noticed, Laura, was that the link that you just put in there, the link so they could see the virtual tour?
There's a whole lot in there. That's Kathy, I posted the link from the FCS page, the resources and videos, and they've got so much on this page. It's videos, resources, fact sheets. We have some universal design, more specific to the farm at the AgAbility page, but there's a lot of great video at the FCS website I just posted.
Yes, and I have handouts. I put Kathy's email address in chat, so if you wanted to.
I just did the same thing.
Oh yeah.
She really wants people to talk to, so help her out.
This link that I just put in chat takes you to a whole bunch of handouts that Kathy and Laura helped assemble. Handouts from extension canning, food preservation, freezing, like a whole ton of things, and a handout on kitchen gadgets as well that Laura put together.
Hey, Kathy, I keep adding on, but I was thinking of your your healthy aging telecast. Do you have the link to that? It's the page that I'm looking at, and I'm just not. But
Aging, healthy aging
really
network.
wonderful telecast that you should definitely watch.
There's the. And again, that is also housed on the FCS page. So that is a monthly telecast that I do related to topics around healthy aging. I'm always looking for guest speakers. Anybody who's interested, let me know. Because we, I try to keep it interesting and keep the topics varied so that we can keep the audience.
All right. Someone said, great virtual tour. Yeah, it's very cool.
Thank you. We did that last year in response to not having our farm science review in person. We still wanted people to be able to go through that tour, so. But I can do groups or classes or anything out at the actual display itself, if someone's interested in that.